He aimed the pistol at my chest. I said his real name, quiet, like a memory I didn't want the town to hear. Everything stopped. Dry Creek's main street held its breath. Late afternoon light cut hard across the boardwalks, catching dust as it rose from boots and wagon wheels. She, Ruth Calder, stood at the livery scale with a cloth tape still looped around her ribs, clerk's pencil marks on a ledger like tally lines on a cell wall. Men gathered to watch the inspection, whispering about debts and arrangements, about the banker's offer and her father's signature. The bandit had come in silent from the alley, black scarf over his face, gun steady. She looked at the eyes above the cloth and said, "Elias." The sheriff's hand froze on his holster. Her father, Ezra Calder, flinched and pretended not to. The banker closed his ledger like he could press the whole town between its covers. Wind pushed a cedar branch against the livery roof with a scrape that sounded like a warning. Ruth didn't look away. Her voice was even, practical, as if addressing a stranger about freight. "You shouldn't have come." The barrel didn't move. Neither did she. A tiny tremor ran through his gun hand. Old injury, a healed break that never set right. She remembered setting the splint herself 2 winters ago, firelight on his bare wrist, the smell of pine pitch. People had said Elias ran with thieves and vanished. Ezra had called him a liar and a thief to his face and sent him off the ranch. The town approved. Ruth hadn't argued. She had pressed a small carved ring into Elias's palm and told him to keep his head down and come back honest. Now he was back, not honest, with a gun on her. "Hostage?" the sheriff said. "Don't do something foolish." The banker nudged Ezra. "Get your girl under control." Elias cocked the hammer. The town moved again, slow, calculating angles. Ruth heard a baby cry up the street and a woman shush it. She felt the tape tighten where the clerk hadn't yet unwound it. Humiliation burned, then cooled. She lifted her chin. "If you're going to shoot, do it without using my face to cover whatever you never said." He blinked. The gun dipped 1 inch, just one, before a far stall door banged open and a wild steer, spooked by noise, shouldered through the rail, horns scraping wood. The crowd broke. Dust went up like smoke. Sheriff's hand flashed. Elias reached for Ruth, meaning to pull her clear. She didn't know whether to slap him or run with him. She did neither. "Why a gun, Elias?" she said. "Why now?" "Because they're coming," he said through the cloth. "For you." The steer barreled across the lane and crashed into a barrel of water, soaking the boards. Men swore and scrambled. In the noise, Elias shouldered Ruth into the narrow space between the livery's inner wall and a stack of cedar rails. His scarf brushed her temple, damp with sweat. "Don't scream," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." The gun never pointed at her again. It pointed past her, guarding the gap. "Then why a show?" she said. Her breath fogged in the cooler air inside the stall. Light fell in straight bars through plank gaps, striping his eyes. She could see the old silvered scar at his brow. Elias pulled something from his coat and pressed it into her palm. It was light, smooth. The carved ring she'd given him. Unfinished cedar, sanded by time. "They're selling you with the cattle," he said. "Ledger says so without saying so. Ezra signed security against the ranch and you, coded in notes, through Walsh." Walsh was the banker. They did it in the church office to make it look clean. "Don't lie on my father," she said. It came out automatic, long-learned habit. Outside, the sheriff's voice rose, ordering men to seal the alleys. The baby up the street wailed again. Ruth closed her fingers on the ring. The cedar smell lifted, sharp and honest. "I saw the papers," Elias said. "I put my hands on them." He touched his wrist, where a leather thong disappeared under his sleeve. "They knew I'd dig. They spread word I stole, then pushed me out. I left because staying would have meant a rope. I came back because the banker needs Ezra to default before next snow, and Walsh advances that by putting you in a hateful house." "Whose?" Her mouth dried. "Walsh's brother-in-law, outside the county line. He breaks women quick and calls it order." She swallowed. Outside, the steer bellowed and then calmed. Boots thudded near the stall. "Back door," Elias said. "Now." He moved first, then stopped, put the gun into his belt, and offered his left hand. She hesitated long enough to understand this was the only choice that wasn't no choice at all. They slipped out to the alley where a cedar tree leaned over the fence, resin bright in the sun. Dust lifted off the ground in small devils and died. Elias steered her along the wall. "There's a safe house," he said. "One night, then we go back in daylight with proof." "Proof won't help against a crowd that likes a sale," she said. "It will if the right man reads it." "Who?" Elias stopped at the alley's end and met her eyes. He untied the leather at his wrist and flipped a small badge into his palm, dull under grime. "Deputized by the circuit judge 3 counties south," he said. "Not a thief." "Not anymore." Boots scraped behind them. Sheriff's men turned into the alley. Ruth closed her fingers on the cedar ring and followed Elias into the light. They reached the safe house after dark, a one-room line shack on the far bend of the river. Cedar stacked under the eaves, a stovepipe ticking in the cooling night. Elias latched the door, checked the single window twice, then tucked the pistol under the cot slats. He lit the lamp low and set a tin cup on the table, like he'd done it here 100 times before. Ruth set the ring on the wood and watched it not roll. "I waited," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I waited a year. Then another. People don't wait forever." "I didn't ask you to," he said. He leaned on the table, hands open, fingers nicked and healed. "I told you to forget me." "You didn't," she said. "You only left." Silence sat between them the way it did at wakes, thick and hushed. The lamp made a small sound. The river, close, said little more than yes, "I'm here." He pulled a folded paper from inside his shirt and pushed it across. Ruth smoothed it flat. The handwriting was neat and cold. It was Walsh's accounting of assets secured and deliveries to Oklahoma City. No names. Only initials and weights. She traced the column. Her initials were there alongside stock and tack. "I thought Ezra was stubborn, not cruel," Elias said. "He is stubborn," she said. "He's also afraid of losing everything and thinks fear is a plan." She looked up. "You made yourself into a man the town could hate. Why?" "Because if I came back plain, they'd pin the old thefts on me again. If I came back as a rumor, I could move. If I came back with a badge, Ezra would spit and Walsh would laugh." He tapped the paper. "But the judge won't." "Judge Hollis?" Ruth asked. "He buried his wife last winter. He keeps to the cedar grove behind the church." Elias nodded. "He hates men like Walsh. He'll hear this if we get him there." "Sheriff's men will be waiting," she said. "They'll be waiting for a bandit," he said. "Not a woman in her Sunday shawl with a basket." She stared at him. The edge of a plan showed itself. Daylight, crowd, church steps, paper in the judge's hand before anyone could snatch it. It could work. It could also kill them. Wind shifted. Hoofbeats thudded closer, then slowed. A board creaked under a careful boot outside. Elias blew the lamp. They stood in the dark, breathing quiet. 3 shadows crossed the window. A voice, "Bandit." "Come out, the sheriff." Ruth felt for Elias's hand in the black. He took hers and squeezed once, a simple human thing. He leaned to her ear. "When I open, drop low. Crawl for the wood box. Wait on my word." She nodded into the dark. Firelight wasn't safety. Silence wasn't peace. But she held them both, because they were all they had. They slipped the sheriff in the night by going through him. Elias opened the door, drew a shot into the frame, and pushed Ruth under the table as he kicked the lamp over. The flash blinded the men outside long enough for Elias to dive through the window and draw them away. Ruth waited, counting heartbeats, then slithered to the back hatch and ran for the river. Cold water up to her knees, stones turning underfoot, shawl heavy, she crossed anyway. On the far bank, a cedar stood like a marker. She tied the ledger page in the shawl's corner and set for town alone, gray light licking the horizon. Dry Creek woke slow. Women swept porches. Men checked stock. The church bell rang once for the hour. Ruth kept her head down, basket on her arm, shawl plain. She walked straight to the church office and asked for Judge Hollis. The clerk frowned at her wet hem and pointed her toward the grove. Hollis stood there alone under tall cedar, hat in hand. Grief had made his face gentle. He saw her and nodded, as if he had expected someone desperate to come to him someday, and here she was. "Sir," Ruth said, "I have a paper you need to read before the sheriff takes it from me." "Then give it to me now," he said, tone quiet but quick. She untied the knot with numb fingers. The judge read, mouth tightening. He folded the paper and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. "Where is Mr. Walsh?" "On his porch, measuring what isn't his yet," she said. "And the sheriff?" "Coming up the lane," the judge said, not looking. "You're safe with me, Miss Calder." "Not with my father," she said. "He'll side with the bank." Judge Hollis stepped from the trees into the square. "Sheriff!" he called, voice carrying like a bell. A word. Men turned. Ezra pushed through them, face hard, mouth set to scold. Walsh stood behind his rail, hands folded, one thumb stroking the other. Elias, mask off now, moved along the far boardwalk like a shadow men weren't sure they saw. "Walsh," the judge said, holding the paper. "You'll come with me to the office." Walsh smiled like a host welcoming late guests. "On what business?" he asked. "Slave traffic," Hollis said. The word landed like iron. Silence took the square. Ezra sputtered. "That's my daughter," he began. Hollis looked at him with pity. "It is. And you signed her away in code." The sheriff shifted, jaw working. "Judge," he said. "That's an ugly word for a dead arrangement." "It's the only word," Hollis said. "You'll stand down." Walsh reached for his coat. Elias moved first. So did the sheriff, but toward Walsh, not Elias. Guns cleared leather. A shot cracked. Wood splintered near Walsh's hand. Elias had fired wide on purpose to force the sheriff's draw into daylight. Sheriff froze, badge catching light, pistol aimed halfway between judge and banker, revealing his split mind. "Drop it," Ruth said, surprising herself. She had Ezra's old shotgun, lifted from the church vestibule where men left them on Sundays. She leveled it at the ground at Walsh's feet, loud enough if she fired. The square held still. Walsh's eyes ticked. He moved wrong. Elias shot true, taking the gun from Walsh's hand and blooding his knuckles. Sheriff flinched, then lowered his weapon like a man backing away from a cliff he hadn't seen. "The court is open," Hollis said. "Now." It didn't end in a hail of bullets. It ended in paperwork and witnesses. Judge Hollis read names and weights aloud on the church steps. Men who had looked away looked at their boots for a long time, then back up with something like shame. Women stood closer to Ruth than they had ever stood before. The sheriff handed over his badge with a quiet face and walked to the office without a fight. Walsh went red, and then pale, already calculating a different town. Ezra stood like a fence post set in rock, jaw tight, mouth shut at last. "Ruth," he started, once the crowd thinned. "Don't," she said. He stopped. He was a stubborn man, not a monster, but stubborn will mixed with fear had made him dangerous. "You can come to supper sometime," she added, surprising herself again, "and you can sit at the end of the table and listen." He nodded, a small old man's motion. That was enough for now. Hollis put a hand on Ruth's shoulder. "You'll file title back to yourself and to any partner you choose," he said. His eyes moved to Elias with a judge's care. "Mr. Hale, your report?" "Filled," Elias said. He looked tired. The bandana was gone. He held his hat to his chest like he remembered church manners. Hollis nodded and walked away, already building the case in his head. Ruth and Elias stood in the shadow of the cedar by the church door. For the first time since the gun, they let the quiet be comfort. Elias pulled the carved ring from his pocket and looked at it as if seeing it new. "I kept it because my hands didn't know how not to," he said. "You kept it because you wanted to come back," Ruth said. She wasn't asking. "I wanted to come back right," he said. "I didn't. Right is sometimes slow," she said. "And ugly." She took the ring and turned it in her fingers. The grain was clear now, the ridge her knife had left the night she carved it. She offered it back to him. He didn't take it. He reached for her shawl instead, settling it higher on her shoulders with an awkward care that warmed her more than sun. "Stay," she said, before she could talk herself out of it. "Eat with me. Fix fence. Sleep near, not far." She didn't promise love. She didn't pretend forgiveness was quick. She offered work and time, which was better. He nodded. "I can do slow." They walked up the lane toward the ranch. A cradle waited in a corner of the house. Unfinished cedar Elias had started carving before he left, because he'd thought life might go one way and it had gone another. Ruth dusted it off that evening and set it near the hearth as a thing that could hold bread, or wood, or someday a child. Firelight made a small room of the world. Silence had weight again, but it wore a kinder face. At the table, Ruth set down bread and beans. Elias took his hat off and didn't put it back on. Outside, the town breathed. Inside, the first true breath of home arrived, simple and earned,